checking with
Are we live?
Good.
Just starting.
Yep,
All right.
we're good to go.
We're live.
We are live. I'm just watching here to make sure that we actually are live.
Yeah, me too, actually. Yeah, we're live. Let's see.
Okay. Good. All right. Thanks for coming, everyone. So tonight we kind of decided to. We've been talking to people attending the meetups, and we've got the impression that there's quite a few people who are coming out to our sessions and haven't actually used Xamarin, and we tend to cover some pretty advanced topics. So we figured it'd be a really good idea to regroup and reset and go through some basics. So cover how to get started with Xamarin and how to get yourself acquainted with the tools and how it works and all that kind of stuff. So you can go about actually using Xamarin to build apps. So first, I'm Dylan Barry. I'm gonna take care of some housekeeping items here. And then Daniel's gonna kick off the presentation. We're kind of tag teaming it tonight. At any point, feel free to interrupt with questions, and we're always happy to answer that. Okay, so first off, we have some news here with the time and location. We're going to continue to meet on the third Tuesday of the month at 6 p.m. HackerU, this location, is no longer going to be available, so we're seeking a new location. Next month, we've lined up just the BSI office, which is going to be great. I'll get to that next, but the location is going to change moving forward, so keep your eye on that. We won't be here anymore. This is the last session that will be in this location at HackerU. So next session, we're going to do an office hours. So this is kind of a nice pairing with the getting started. So if you're looking to get started with Xamarin and then you want some hands-on help, this office hours is a good opportunity to get hands-on help from someone who's experienced with the tools. So we're going to be holding office hours May 21st at the PSI Labs office, which is just basically down the road. So it's at King and Spadina. Daniel will be there, I'll be there, Alan Ritchie will be there. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the ECR libraries. Hey, Scott. I'm sure Scott will be there. Scott's usually at our meetups. Emily will be there. Another developer, Matt Farrow, will be there. So we've all worked to build lots of Xamarin apps and have good experience. So if you're getting started with the tool and you're running into issues and want hands-on help, the office hours is a great way to actually get past that hurdle. Next up is our cyclical call for speakers. So if you're interested in presenting, it doesn't have to be a full presentation, it doesn't have to be the full session. It could just be like a 5 minutes, get up here and demo what you've done. We're always happy to have the community come and present. If you are interested in checking out the couple of community speaking events we had previously, the lightning talks are up on YouTube. Our March session was absolutely over the top phenomenal. We had 4 speakers from the community. Everybody was excellent, and it was a really beautiful thing to watch the community all step up and present some really solid topics. So check it out, get a little inspired, and hopefully we'll see you up at the front of the room here. If you're looking to connect with us, this slide is a little bit out of date because we now have a website. I'll actually just go back to this slide. Our website is tomobiledevs.com, TO being Toronto. So all these links, you don't have to look at these links or take a picture, just go to the TO Mobile Devs. It's just basically a collection of links at this point. We're still working on an actual website to launch where we can have a more centralized community space for blogging and have some forums and things like that so you can engage and talk to other people in the community. Next up, thanks to our sponsor, BSI Labs. So BSI Labs is actually they're great have done great things for helping this community get off the ground. They provide the food and pay for the venue. They pay for time for Daniel and I to prep the presentation and make sure that everything's flowing smoothly. PSI Labs is a cloud and mobile development shop. We really focus on helping companies who are struggling to deliver Xamarin actually accelerate and get their apps shipped. So if you're running into problems with shipping your app, please give us a call. We'd love to hear from you and help you get your app out the door. We also do greenfield implementations. We do technical consulting and mobile strategy, and you can find us at PSI Labs on Twitter and at psilabs.ca. Skipping over that one because we've got more detailed community announcements. So we started this last month because there's a lot going on in the community and we want to try and cover it all. First off, the Xamarin Developer Summit. So if you're a Xamarin developer and you want to connect with other Xamarin developers, if you're starting out and you want to kind of learn the ropes really quickly, this would be like a 2-day boot camp down in Houston, Texas in July. Really good way to get up to speed and keep in touch with the community and learn what's going on in the broader ecosystem. We've got a little surprise at the end around this, and stay tuned for that at the end of today's session. Next up, Global Azure Bootcamp. So this is a full day session in Mississauga. What is that, next Saturday? Yeah, not this coming Saturday, but the one after. So if you're looking to really dig into those new Azure features and get acquainted with, or maybe get acquainted with some of the basics of Azure, you can join them. It's a free session. I think there might be a waiting list, but who knows? Usually these sessions, they open up spots near the end, and because participation level tends to be, if you get 200 people signing up, usually 100 will actually show up. So keep your eye on that. You might want to join the waiting list if you're interested in that. That's hosted by the Metro Toronto user group. The Metro Toronto user group and the Toronto.NET Meetup are having a Microsoft Build viewing party. This is Monday, May 6th during Build, so it's actually for the primary keynote. So you go, you watch the keynote, and connect with some people who are into the same technology and looking at what Microsoft's doing as far as the new innovations. Last but not least, the .NET Community Stand-Up. If you haven't watched this, it's really interesting. So I'm highlighting mobile here, but they meet every Thursday. It's a live stream on YouTube or Twitch, and they basically run through a bunch of things going on in the community, a bunch of new project things happening. They speak to team members who are building components and can talk at a technical level, like what's the way something works, or why it's built this way, or what's in the future. It's really great. I found it extremely valuable. Of course, yeah, we're highlighting mobile because we're talking mobile here tonight, and that's the first Thursday of the month. You can subscribe to their YouTube feed, and it's great. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to let Daniel take the reins, and we'll talk about getting started with Xamarin.
All right, hello everyone, welcome. How many of you have built anything or did anything with Xamarin? You guys? Okay, cool. So yeah, so most of the audience is new to Xamarin, right? Can say that for sure. So great. This is the perfect session for you. So just starting up the presentation, Dylan Barry.
Hi.
This guy, we work together at PSI Labs. He's our team lead, right? Over 17 years of professional experience. You can go to his website about.me/DylanBarry and check out his social media. What about me? I'm Daniel John Kauser. I'm also a developer over at PSI Labs. I've been building Xamarin apps for about 3 years now, 3 years and a half. I'm a Xamarin certified developer, as well as Dylan is. and I'm also a community author. Like we have this thing called Planet Xamarin. It's basically a content aggregator of all of the blogs that are focused on publishing content around Xamarin and mobile development using the .NET stack. So if you're interested, check it out. We're gonna talk about it a little more later on. So what is Xamarin? Good question. So Xamarin is basically a framework that allows us to write code once and ship it to many places, right? So Xamarin, just a little bit of history. Like Xamarin was first started by Miguel de Casa, and he started this company. And Xamarin was built on top of Mono, which is what the engine that actually allows us to write C# code once and build it everywhere. With using Xamarin, you can basically build apps for all of these platforms over here. The main ones are iOS, iPad, and iPhones, Android, and Windows 10 applications, right? The other ones that you can also write to are tvOS and a desktop Mac apps, and also like build apps for Android wearables, right? So basically watches, right, that run on Android. And what about Xamarin Forms? So there's a very so these two technologies are different. So Xamarin Forms is actually built to run on top of Xamarin. Differently from Xamarin itself, where you have projects for Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android. There are actually projects for that platform specific. With Xamarin Forms, as you can see here in this diagram, you have one shared UI where you write all of your UI using XAML. It's a markup language similar to what WPF, and I don't know if anyone ever used Silverlight over here. You should be quite familiar with the syntax as well. It's different, but it's similar. Go ahead.
Good question. You build Windows apps with it too, right? How does it compare with WinForms?
Okay, so what Windows Forms is, it's a layer that it's built on top of Xamarin, and it basically it's a shared UI. So what happens is that you have all your views, all of your screens using all of your screens built using XAML, and Xamarin Forms is actually gonna grab that code and it's gonna deploy to, it's gonna make it's gonna basically deploy to the target platform, right? So if you have a button on Xamarin Forms, you have the same button over in iOS, UWP, or Android. The difference is that it's not the same UI, it's not the same look of the button, but actually it's gonna be the native button of the iOS platform, of the Android platform, and the UWP platform.
Yeah, so did anybody use Java like back when Java applets were a thing? Is anybody familiar with that?
Swing.
Swing. So before that, like old school Java used to have its own UI toolkit, and what we're saying is like Xamarin is not that. Xamarin is an abstraction that sits on top of the actual native out of the box components. So the way Xamarin Forms works is it's an abstraction of each platform. So iOS has a button, Android has a button, Windows has a button, like Dan was described.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes the common properties of those and rolls them up into one abstraction that you can manipulate.
Mm-hmm.
So you change the font size, and it knows how to translate that to the font size property in iOS, the font size property in Android, and the font size property in Windows. So it compiles down to actually native code.
Awesome.
So a little bit more, just one more thing to elaborate. You can think of Xamarin like a Venn diagram, or Xamarin Forms, I'd say. So if you've got, I assume you don't need the actual, sure. Okay. So say we've got iOS. So iOS has all these features. Right? So iOS has buttons, and they have, what else could we say? What's one that's more segmented control? So you know the control that kind of sits at the top, and it's got, it looks like oval shaped, and it's got divisions here, and it'll say like option 1, option 2, option 3, and there's maybe some, you click option 1, it shows you a filtered set of photos, and click option 2. So it's almost like tabs. So that's only an iOS control. So iOS has that. And if we take like another operating system, we start talking about Android. So these are the Android feature set. So in here, this is where Xamarin Forms resides. Xamarin has all of iOS's controls exposed to the CSharp developer and all of Android's controls. But because there's only a certain subset that intersect, this is where Xamarin Forms operates in this subsection.
And what is great about Xamarin Forms and the Xamarin platform overall is that you're not stuck to that group of components that are common in the platforms, right? So if you have to write something that is not common to all of the platforms and you need it in your app, you can basically build it on the platform itself and then use it on your shared project. And for that, then you would have to, again, write that component on every of the platforms that you're targeting. And basically, it would have an abstraction on your Xamarin Forms project, and the implementation would be on each of the projects on the target platforms, right? So Xamarin provides an entire tool set. It's very mature. There's a lot of tool set, a lot of components for you to use. But if it happened that you have to write anything that is very platform specific, then you do have the power to do whatever you really need. Again, it's widely used. It's actually quite amazing the amount of people today using Xamarin for building their apps or working with Xamarin on their day-to-day jobs, right? Have you guys seen the developer survey from Stack Overflow, the 2019? So it basically, like throughout 2018, they sent out surveys to everyone that uses Stack Overflow for them to rank the technologies that they most use, or they most want to use, or they use and they love. And these are some really nice results for Xamarin platform. It's ranked between of the top most used frameworks. And that's not only mobile specific, it's across all of the other frameworks like .NET Core, Xamarin, Flutter, and a whole bunch of other frameworks. Like we're on the top 10 of the most used ones. We're also between the top 20 most loved frameworks, and between the most wanted, like the developers that do not work with Xamarin and they have shown any interest of working with it. So some really cool results for 2019. I also thought that it would be interesting to just discuss a little bit other tools that do the same thing or quite similar to what Xamarin is proposed to doing. One of them basically writing native applications, right? Writing C, like Swift and Objective-C for iOS, and building your your application, and writing your apps in Java and in Kotlin on Android Studio. Like you would have two separate code bases, which is and two separate tool sets that you had to hire people to work with, and depending on the case, it might not be the best option for yourself or your client. Other options as well are React Native. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it, right? Cordova. Have you guys heard of it? It's another. They all propose to solve like this issue of writing once and shipping your app everywhere. The specific, my personal opinion on React Native and Cordova is that they're not really native, not as native as Xamarin and the native tools are.
Well,
why? Because JS is not compiled, right? It's interpreted, so it might be fast, it might work really nice, you might have access to all of the native APIs, but at the end of the day, it's not compiled, it's all interpreted. So, and it's not strongly typed as well because you're writing JavaScript, so there's all sorts of problems that it can bring for you. And another one is Flutter. We had a friend of ours present about Flutter over here the other day, right? Lewis. Yeah. There's a lot of hype around Flutter. It's pretty cool, like the way it's done. It is compiled, and it's different from Xamarin in a sense that instead of using the native APIs, it draws all your controls on the app. So you don't really get the native look and feel of each of the platforms, but you have the same button in all of the platforms, right? And it uses the GPU when it's running on your phone, so it kind of works as a game, not like a real app. I don't know, it's a different approach. It seems to work, but it's still not quite mature. It's still not, it doesn't have a community as strong as Xamarin has, since Xamarin has been around for over 6 years now.
Don't we have Unity to do the same thing?
Sorry?
To run apps as games. Don't we have Unity?
Yeah, you can.
We've had that for like 6 years now.
It's a good
Yeah.
analogy, right? Like we actually, before Flutter came out, like we were talking to Lewis, who's he's our friend who's into
The Flutter geek.
Yeah, and he's like, he was saying like, why isn't there something like Unity, but you know, draws on a 2D canvas? And then Flutter came out, and that's basically
the same thing. Because like
similar
people
concept.
were building mobile apps in small groups and stuff with Unity. They've been doing that for years. NVIDIA built their app on Unity.
Yeah,
Why not?
it's different because it's specifically tooled for building like line of business applications.
Yeah.
It's not, and Unity is tooled specifically for building games.
Yeah, so the organization of the project might not be as great as when you're writing a Xamarin app. I mean, Dylan will cover this a little bit, all of the benefits of actually building your app with Xamarin, all of the code sharing and all of the organization and all of the tools that we really have for on the .NET world, right? You have NuGet, you have billions of libraries that you can use in your app, and yeah, we're gonna get there soon enough. Actually, so it's a little bit of demo time. So I wanted to show you guys how native Xamarin actually is. So just like an explanation of the demo, I'll be like creating an app using Xcode real fast. I'm gonna drop some UI on the app, and I'll basically just grab the storyboard and dump it on a Xamarin project, on a Xamarin iOS project, and it's gonna run like that. Okay. And for demo's sake, let me start it up. Xcode. So I'm gonna open Xcode.
You are not using Visual Studio for that, or?
So I'm gonna use Visual Studio when I create the Xamarin iOS app. I'm gonna show you guys. You can use Xamarin Studio for Mac and Visual Studio for Windows when developing Xamarin apps. You can also use MonoDevelop if you like to build your apps in Linux. Not sure if that's the best option, but yeah, we're also gonna cover all of the IDEs that you have available for you. We're gonna cover all that. So okay, so file new project. All right, so just a single view app. So this is Xcode for you guys that are not familiar with. This is what basically the developers that use Swift and Objective-C for writing their apps, this is what they use, the IDE of choice for doing that. Let's say just Meetup App. Ooh, should be it. I'm gonna save it on the desktop. Okay, great. Here we go. I'm gonna open the MainStoryboard. And I'm gonna drop some controls over here. I don't know. Drop a button. Gonna change the text to the button. What else? Text.
How about a segmented goal?
Sure.
Since I talked about it earlier.
Yep.
So now everybody knows what I was talking about. When
Yeah,
I
this is
said
the segmented
control.
All right. So I'm gonna save it and just build it. Just see if it actually works. This is starting up the simulator. There we go. Segmented control, a button that does nothing. Great. Let's actually now open. I'm gonna say Xamarin Studio. Xamarin Studio was the IDE for building apps in Mac like a couple of years ago. So here is the Visual Studio 2019 for Mac. I'm using this for building apps over at PSI. I'm gonna go and just all right. Go over here and just create a single view app. Xamarin iOS. Here we have all of the options of apps that you can write. .NET Core, tvOS, Mac, cloud apps like Azure functions and things like that. All right. Meetup App. Xamarin. Okay. No, create it on the desktop. All right, here we go. So structure should be basically the same. What I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna copy the main storyboard of the iOS project. I'm gonna go Stream Finder. I'm gonna just drag and drop this puppy over to here. So I'm not gonna sure if it's gonna override or what's gonna do. Sure, copy it there. Alright, there you go. Cool. Alright, so it should have copied the storyboard that we had over at the iOS app to here. I'm gonna hit play and cross my fingers that it works. And did it work? I think so. Let me just shoot it again, just for sanity's sake. So see, we have two apps here. So this one is the Meetup App of Xamarin that I've created my project with, and this is the Meetup App. Yeah, that I built using Xcode. Cool. All right, here we go. See? I guess you can call it pretty native stuff, right? So, yeah, this is great because it makes it easy to bring existing apps or existing projects to the Xamarin platform. And not only you can do this with Xamarin iOS, but Xamarin Android and other apps built on the native platform. Another good tool that we have in Xamarin is actually building things using .NET and using that to display on your native iOS or Android project. There's a name for it, it's Embedator, right? So for screens that are like basically like about screens, usually is the same thing, right? Like you have an about of the company that built that app and things like that. You can build that using Xamarin and then use that through the Embedator on your native, not Xamarin native platforms. So yeah, that's it for this demo.
I have one question here.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you transfer your Xcode project to Xamarin, like everything you can run it as a Xamarin app without touching any code that you write in Objective-C or Swift.
So that's a great question. Like the main view model, the main storyboard, it contains all of the UI for your app. So all of the code written in it, it's in Swift or Objective-C. You would have to translate that to CSharp. The good thing, though, is that even though the syntax is different, all of the APIs, all of the naming, everything is the same. So really all you would have to do is just basically translate from what you're seeing in Swift to CSharp, to using the CSharp syntax. So yeah, because Xamarin is a binding one-to-one with all of the native platform APIs, all of the method names, all of the object, all of the classes, everything is basically the same. So yeah, you would just have to translate the iOS to C#.
Yeah, like it will not take the library and run it simultaneously with Xamarin.
Yeah, like I mean, if you have a library built on Swift or something, you can create a certain type of project called a binding project. That's it, Dylan? Binding project?
Yeah.
To do the bridge between native Swift back to C#.
Not Swift. Unofficially Swift, but it's Objective-C libraries.
Okay.
There's a third party, Swift.
Uh-huh.
I think that allows you to bind it, but not
Okay.
Objective-C.
So yeah, if you do have like not only like if you have libraries built on Objective-C or Java, you can like there's I can show you guys. Like I haven't done it before, but I know that it's possible to do it. Should be something here of a binding library. I don't know if there's any.
iOS library.
iOS library. There you go. See, like bind a native library or framework for use with Xamarin iOS. So it's basically here doing this. You'll be replicating what Xamarin does, like creating libraries that bind to the native libraries. So if you have code built using like services and things built using like Objective-C, you can use these binding libraries. But in the case of like a code in your view controllers, you might have to translate that back to C#. Yeah. Okay, so back to the present. Any more questions? Like,
I have a question.
yeah, go
Can
ahead.
we convert it to the Xamarin as well? I mean, Android as well? Like,
You can as well. Like on the Android, on the
we
Xamarin.
have I mean, Xcode project that is being converted to the iOS one, the Xamarin iOS. That same native app can be used in the Android.
Yeah. So I'm not sure if I understand your question.
No, without any code changes, but he asked us he converted to the iOS project, Xamarin iOS one, no?
So what I did here, I created like a project in like a Xamarin iOS project and iOS native project using Xcode. So what I did is basically just copied over one file from the native platform to the Xamarin iOS.
So
And
can I use that one in the Android?
you can.
Well,
It depends on what you mean by that.
yeah.
So from native iOS, the UI is done in storyboard files or big files. So those can be brought into Xamarin iOS. They can't be brought into Xamarin Android. But Android UI is done in XML files, and those can be brought into Xamarin Android, and we use those. But similarly, Android XML can't be brought into Xamarin iOS.
Perfect. That's perfect.
Depends on what you meant by your question.
Yeah. So to bring, yeah, exactly. Like I couldn't put it in better words. Like Scott, like just said, like if you can do this from iOS to Xamarin iOS and Android to Xamarin Android. You cannot use like iOS the storyboards into Xamarin Android. That wouldn't work.
Yeah. If you want a common UI, you have to use Xamarin Forms, which
Yeah.
uses Xamarin.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different language. So what generally will happen if people are looking to switch from having native apps that are built in, Kotlin and Swift over to Xamarin is they will do what Daniel did first. So they'll move their storyboards in and import their UI code, and they will do a nice steady flow of migrating all their logic into a common project. So that because you're working all in a common language now, so you brought your UI over
CSharp.
to Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android. Great. So you're all working in C#. Excellent. So everything's written in the same language. So you can start abstracting the commonalities into a single project, which both the iOS and the Android can point to. So once you get to that stage, then you can go, okay, well, which parts of the UI can I move to Xamarin Forms? Because Xamarin Forms is a common language for the UI, so you don't have to have separate storyboards and Android XML. So that's the next phase that you start doing, is you start moving the common screens into XAML files, and then deleting your storyboards and deleting your Android XML. So that's generally how that process would work if you were to move from native into Xamarin. Does that answer what you were looking for?
Is everyone like clear on what is Xamarin and Xamarin Forms? It's quite a common question. Like we see that a lot of people get doubts on that. Are you guys good? Go ahead.
You didn't have to copy the UI, right? You could have built it in Xamarin by itself. Well,
Yeah. So the UI, I could have used the storyboard in Xamarin iOS. Like you, yeah, I could have built everything using Visual Studio and the tools that it has for building, like using the storyboard in it. Or I could have built the whole UI using Xcode on the storyboard in Xcode and in the end just importing it. But again, bringing the storyboard over to the Xamarin iOS only brings the UI.
Yeah.
The code of how the screens are gonna behave, you're gonna have to translate from the native code to C#. Yeah?
One thing I'll say about that is you can't actually do the UI in the storyboard in Visual Studio, but if you right click on the storyboard in Visual Studio, you also have the option of opening up the Xcode. I don't recommend doing that because it's a much better
Yeah.
And also any changes you make in Xcode in the storyboard, once you go back to Visual Studio, it'll pick up the changes. So if you create any button-click handler, anything like that, your CSharp visual would be aware of it. So there you have a good connection to Xcode, but Xcode is much like this.
Yeah, that's all true.
Yeah. Another note, like this scenario that we just went through is if you have an existing app, right? So if you have an existing native app and you're looking to move it to Xamarin, that's the flow that you take. You start with the storyboards, and move the storyboards over, then you move your code over, then you, as I mentioned to Dave when he was asking that question, you would take that code and you'd start abstracting it into a common project. If you were starting with a brand new app, generally these days you'd want to start with Forms. Xamarin Forms has been around for long enough now and is mature enough that you can build really, really breathtaking, beautiful, responsive,
Performant.
just excellent apps, like first-class applications using Xamarin Forms. Xamarin Forms kind of has this reputation of being clunky, and it is definitely not clunky anymore. It was clunky in its early days, as everything is in V1. It's now V3, rapidly approaching V4, and it's excellent. The Microsoft team that's taking care of Xamarin Forms is excellent at listening to feedback. They're trying to solve developers' problems to make the product better, and it really shows. So,
but Windows is still struggling now. Xamarin Windows.
Xamarin Windows?
Yeah, UWP version.
Yeah, the UWP, so there was,
There's not that much of support.
yeah, they're trying to increase that because the community responded. So they started dropping support.
Yeah.
So just so everybody knows, like, what we're talking about here, Xamarin has traditionally always come with 3 sets of templates: Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android, Xamarin UWP. In Visual Studio 2019, they dropped UWP in the templates, so when you went to create a new project, UWP wasn't there. And the community went, come on guys, this is your own platform. So Microsoft kind of reset. We now have the templates available again. There's some momentum behind maintaining it, and UWP will be, there's some community momentum behind bringing the UWP support up to the same level as iOS and Android, because the feedback that I've seen is it's actually easier to build UWP apps with Xamarin than it is with UWP.
Yeah.
So that's kind of where things are headed. So UWP will be strongly supported.
You mean the component for the Windows App Store, not the old UWP?
Mm-hmm. Well, like building like what I'd say native UWP, pure native UWP versus Xamarin UWP. People are saying that I don't have direct experience with this because I don't build UWP, but UWP, people who are working with UWP say it's easier to build with Xamarin UWP than it is with classic UWP or just straight UWP.
Awesome. Oh, good. You had a question, right?
Say we had a library built from .NET
Yeah.
and .NET Core, and this was built like some years ago, but it still kept expanding. And now we want to import it and kind of build it for Xamarin. How do we go about doing that? The flow is.
So I guess you would have a library using net standard, maybe. Like pretty easy, just import. You include it in your solution and import it into your.
But is it going to work? Like, that's the issues we run into all the time. Oh, this is not point one is being dropped. We can't support it, and then we still install all those runtimes. But how would it go from a mobile?
Okay, so for sharing logic, you would have to have a library, a net standard 2.0 library. It's like the most. No, it's 2.1, right? Right? That it's out now. So for sharing the logic between all of your target, all of your head projects, like a .NET Core app, you would have to have an other library that would retain all of your classes, all of your business logic and everything, and then you could share that library between your Xamarin app and your .NET Core API, your .NET Core MVC, or really all of the libraries, all of the products that we have right now, right, with Microsoft. Dylan's gonna cover this a little bit on the code sharing benefits of building apps with Xamarin.
Yeah.
Actually, it's right now, right? You
Yeah.
can come up.
That's my turn. Even though I've been talking through it.
No worries. That's how it goes.
Yeah, so let's talk about features and benefits. So it probably already seems pretty clear, right, what the features and benefits are. Like if you're gonna build an app and have two development teams, and usually that's the way it works because the two API surfaces and two languages are different. The two sets of tools are different. And so you're building two apps completely disparately. They're you know, the iOS team is over here and the Android team is over here. And you'll often see that it's starting to become more consolidated as, you know, more larger organizations are using cross-platform approaches. But you used to see, what was I think it was Facebook was the big one, because Facebook would have a ton of features for iOS for a while and then a ton of features for Android, because one team would take the lead and then the other team would fall behind. The other team would take the lead as they're like, you know, clean up technical debt or something like that. So the Android would have way more features and then iOS would have way more features, and people would complain about which one was ahead in the game. So, and that's like the reality, particularly when we're talking about organizations where it's not their core focus to deliver mobile. Like they're maybe delivering mobile to take care of customers, but not necessarily, they're not like a mobile app shop, right? That's not what their core business is. For Facebook, it was their core business to be a mobile app shop. So they were building two separate apps and it was crazy. But for like say you had a medium-sized organization and they needed to get, let's talk about a financial institution. So we're talking about, let's talk about like a hedge fund or something like this. So a hedge fund has 15 traders, they're all making a lot of money. So, okay, they've got some budget to make sure those traders have better real-time information. They're gonna build an app. Do they wanna hire two separate sets of development teams to build one app? Because some people are on iOS and some people are on Android, and that's really the reality we have. Not everybody is stuck to one platform. Everybody's pretty much in bring your own device mode at this point, so they're not issuing corporate devices to employees. It's people will say, no, I've got an Android, this should work on my device. I'm not carrying two phones. Make me an Android app. Particularly if you're talking about a trader, you're gonna make them an Android app, or they'll go to the other shop on the street. So there's all kinds of scenarios where you'd really want to cut down on the overhead of having two development teams. Anytime you could take two development teams and say, well, let's go with one development team, it's advantageous, clearly, obvious. So Xamarin gives you the ability to build iOS and Android using the same logic, all in C#. So common language, one set of logic, not two sets of separately maintained logic in two different languages, and one development team to build for 2, 3 platforms. If you're doing Wear, 4 platforms. If you're doing tvOS, like you can basically build for most major platforms out there. I position everything as iOS and Android because that's the main problem that Xamarin is trying to solve, and that's where I work. That's my comfort zone. Like I said, I don't deal with UWP, but UWP is an option. I don't deal with Android Wear, but Android Wear I've experimented with, and it's interesting. So there's lots you can apply it to. So 2 code bases to 1, 2 or more languages because you might be Objective-C, Swift, Java, and Kotlin to 1, C#, 2 sets of skills to 1. You get the power of .NET Framework or .NET. There's all kinds of baked-in APIs with .NET Standard that are available to Xamarin now. So this is what I'm talking about, like kind of the reputation and the evolution of Xamarin. So when Microsoft purchased Xamarin a few years ago, one of the main reasons why Microsoft purchased Xamarin is for the way Xamarin was building Mono. So as Daniel mentioned, Miguel de Casa is like the father of Mono.
Like the guru.
Yeah, and he he has pushed the consolidation of .NET. So Microsoft has consolidated .NET into one set of cross-platform APIs in .NET Standard. So .NET Standard allows you to run the same code on every device. The same, you can take the same assembly and run it on every device because the capabilities have been brought up across the board and standardized. So you get that with .NET. Now you can import all kinds of assemblies. You're not struggling with the old approach of PCLs, which is one of the things that used to plague Xamarin. So that brings in NuGet. You can just bring in your favorite NuGet packages. So if you want to use, I don't know, AutoMapper, that's a pretty common one. You can use AutoMapper. Done. Click. Done. It's in there. You can now use AutoMapper.
Refit.
Yeah, refit. Well, that one's a little bit. That's
HTTP JSON.
yeah. Really, anything that's on NuGet that doesn't have like web-specific dependencies, you can bring in, right? And you can use it right in your Xamarin code. Very powerful.
Give an entity framework.
Yeah, Entity Framework. We've been using Entity Framework 2.1 in our project to pull data and push data into SQLite. Like, the capabilities are there. There's certain things that, yeah, sure, you might run into some limitations, but the limitations are pretty far out there. You have to get into really together your DB context and all the things that you're used to. So it's great. So that's a really good point because that brings it in code sharing. So now, because we're using C# and because ASP.NET is generally, I think, who here has used ASP.NET to build a major project? Probably most of the room, right? So if you're using ASP.NET for your backend, you can share code between your backend and your front end.
Yeah.
So you can have a project with your models, your data models in it that you can share across. You can have validation that sits on both the client and the server. You can use reference the same library. So if you've got complex validation rules that you need to use offline when your app is not connected to the backend, you can still use those rules because you can bring that assembly right into your app.
Yeah.
Huge, huge advantage. So next, open source. So Xamarin's open source now too, which is phenomenal. Yeah, everything's on GitHub. So if you don't know how something works, just go look at the code and figure out how it works. I've done this numerous times. I do this all the time now. It's nice to be able to dig under the covers and see how something is working. So,
What are the current problems and what issues people
exactly.
are opening?
Everything's out in the open, right?
Yeah.
You can look through the issue list. People have well-documented issues that they've run into. People will chime in and say, oh, you can work around it with this, or we have an update ready to push, here you go, or there's that benefit of having things in the open makes it much easier to work with the framework. Now, got a little demo lined up here, so this should be interesting.
My machine.
Yeah, I'm using Daniel's machine. So I'll launch a guest window in Chrome for you, Daniel, so we don't screw up your life. Okay. So I just wanted to give everybody kind of a tour of all the different things that are available through like on GitHub. So let's just go to GitHub. So everything's out in the open, like I said. If you're looking for specifics on how the actual framework's operating, you've got access to the code right here. So you've got Xamarin Forms, Xamarin Android, Mac and iOS. You've got a bunch of samples. These samples are incredibly, incredibly helpful if you're getting started. They walk through a lot of different things. Google Play services, components, specific iOS examples, Mac samples, so all these kind of things that you'd need to get started and need to, that would help you kickstart. Essentials, this is a library which exposes platform-specific APIs, so like geolocation. It's a nice little abstraction on top of the geolocation APIs in Android and iOS. that brings them up into your common code. So you just bring in that library and you don't have to muck around with any iOS specific or Android specific code. You just use the Xamarin Essentials library. This one's very interesting. This is the mobile customer advisory team. So this team, I think they used to be called the Xamarin Jetpack team. They have put together basically a best practices repository. So you can look through their samples and they kind of show you how to do things correct so you're not going to get into trouble building your Xamarin projects. All kinds of stuff there. It also gives really having this open source hub tends to spur the rest of the community into building open source components. I know I've kind of fallen into this line. Daniel and I built a library which I'm constantly plugging here, shamelessly. So we built a library called HTTP Tracer, which allows you to trace your HTTP request from the client side. So basically gives you some output in the debug window so it doesn't become a black box. You don't have to muck around with Fiddler. You just use HTTP Tracer and it dumps your request into your debug output. There's all kinds of other libraries. Let's see, what would be a good example? Let's park libraries. So the other thing would be Xamarin University, which is going away. See how bad I botched that spelling. Xamarin University is going away, but they are looking to replace it. There's actually a survey out right now. I'll dig up a link for that while Daniel does his next segment here. But Rob Gibbons, I think that's his name. Anyways, Xamarin University trainers are soliciting feedback for the next iteration. They're moving things into Microsoft Learn, for free, trying to standardize the platform, and they want feedback from people who are members of the community. So people who are starting out, people who are well versed with the platform, they're looking for feedback to improve how they're delivering that content.
And just like to add something, Xamarin University is a paid platform, so through that you would get your certification. And as Dylan said, they're bringing that to Microsoft Learning. So all of the content that Xamarin University used to have is going to be available for free, so you don't have to pay anymore to learn about Xamarin. So yeah, that's great. It's a great time to try to just get started with Xamarin.
So the community is pretty extensive. Daniel touched on Planet Xamarin. So Planet Xamarin is, this is not friendly for showing on screen, but it's an aggregator.
It's the preview.
Preview?
Yep.
Yeah, I've never actually gone directly to their site. So it's an aggregator that shows all the different community blogs that have joined Planet Xamarin. It's a really great spot to kind of keep on top of what's happening with the platform, with the community. There's plenty going on YouTube. I touched earlier on the .NET stand-up. That's very helpful. Got a couple other notes down here. Twitch. Oh yes, Twitch has a lot of momentum right now.
A lot of people building apps from scratch, right?
Yeah.
Like series of videos like building apps from scratch, putting up all of the infrastructure. It's very interesting stuff.
I don't have a
somebody
link.
in YouTube built a whole iOS app in YouTube. Take a famous application like YouTube and mimic how it's looking using native code.
Awesome. Yeah. I've seen that for LinkedIn and for Twitter as well. People will try to replicate those apps using Xamarin. So you get a lot of the UI that they're building, and you get that basically for free. Just look at how they're doing it.
He's live right now. CSharp Fritz. I went over to his page. So I don't use Twitch very often. I'm like an old man. So for me, I get on here and I'm like, get off my lawn. I don't know how to use this UI or how to. But yeah, there's lots of people who stream on Twitch. Lots of Xamarin specific people. So that's one to look out
So
for.
for my comment, but it looked like AWS backend.
Yeah. One other thing, there's if you're just getting started with this, there's a Heroku link out here for Xamarin Slack. There's lots of good stuff in here. I just kind of keep an eye on this because it's interesting to see what people are doing, where they're having challenges. Decent way to connect with the community just on an as needed basis. So that's out there too. All right. Is this you or me, Daniel? Okay. I'll pass it back. Any questions before I sit down?
Right, so just wanted to cover a little bit how to start. If you
Might want a full screen.
How many of you are Mac users? What about Windows users? Okay, great. So most of you actually use Windows, and I mean, all that we've been doing here using the Mac is actually it has Windows Visual Studio for Windows has a much better user experience for you. So even though you need a Mac to build your iOS apps, again, like, since Xamarin iOS is native, you do have to ask a Mac to compile it for you, and yeah, so you do need a connection with a Mac in cloud or a Mac in the network for you to build the iOS app itself. So I just wanted to do some basically just download the Visual Studio. So on the Visual Studio installer, there's an option for you to download what you need for working with Xamarin. That will download all of the Android SDKs, all of the Xamarin toolset, and that's all you really need to do. And just go file, new project, and you're good to go. As I mentioned earlier, you can really build apps in whatever OS platform you choose, from macOS, Windows, and Linux. Linux is, I have personally never built anything using Linux. I know that there's a mono-develop that, I don't know how well maintained is mono-develop, but you could use it, right?
But it would how when Visual Studio first came out to Mac, it only had a limited set of features.
Yeah.
It's still at that stage.
Okay. So it hasn't been updated frequently,
Yeah.
right?
I mean, you can still not run Net Framework 4.7.1. It's still stopped there. It's not up to 4.7.2.
Okay.
You can't build 4.7.2.
Okay.
Apps single.
Cool. So yeah, you can use mono-develop as well. Here's the tools that we have available. As I mentioned, there's the little logo for mono-develop. This is Visual Studio for Mac and Windows. We also have JetBrains Rider, which has been a great tool that we've been using lately. Basically brings all of the goodies from ReSharper to Visual Studio for the Mac platform. Sorry. So on the Mac, you can do whatever, all of the great stuff, renaming and moving things to a new namespace, and renaming updating all of the reference to files, all of that great stuff. There's also DevOps, Visual Studio DevOps, I think it's the name. Azure DevOps, yeah. They change the name all the time. It just confuses me. When they updated it from what the hell was it before? No, even before. Yeah, I had this whole bunch of filters that would just be basically like, I don't want all of the garbage that like all of the builds and everything that it does. It sends email to you. So I had all of those filters, and then when they updated the name, basically all of my filters broke. It was a mayhem. So yeah, you have that to can use this to build your CI and your continuous delivery, continuous integration. It's very well. It's a great tool for Xamarin apps. Like we've been doing some pretty crazy stuff, like on our build pipeline and our delivery pipeline. You can also use App Center. It's something specifically built for CI and CD for apps. It's free. Like I use it on my GitHub. Like I have like it linked to my GitHub account to some of my repos, and as soon as I push things to master branch, it will like compile and create the apps for me, and basically ship emails to my users that there's a new version of the app available. So there's an option like the main way to go is through the app stores. But while you're on a beta cycle or on a test cycle, you can do that. It's really nice and free. Like I don't know to what extent it is free. Like you have a certain amount of build time per month for free. Go ahead.
I can talk about more. I actually work in the App Center team
Okay.
of Microsoft. So it's more than CI/CD. We also have crashes analytics
Yes.
as well that you can integrate into your project. So
Yeah, I'm gonna mention that.
And specifically for Xamarin, we have handled errors.
Mhm.
So it's not only exceptions. You can also, if you're trying and capturing the error, you can actually log it. And finally, push notifications so you can go through. The other thing is, sorry.
Testing. UI testing.
UI testing.
UI
the most
testing,
important
yeah.
one. Yes, you can do UI testing on we have 3,000 physical devices in the lab, so you can push it and see what it looks like on these Android and iOS. And you mentioned for distribution, we can also connect to Intune, Apple Store, and Google.
Yep.
So that way you have the pipeline ready for you. So you can build native iOS apps or Xamarin, of course, distribute it directly to the store, and of course in the middle you can do the test and unit tests, so the full end-to-end.
Yeah, it's awesome. We actually had last year Madi present App Center for us, right? I haven't used the integration of App Center to deploy to the stores automatically. I haven't personally used that. It's great.
Very good. It uses
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
So sorry, if I have a question for App Center. If I have a SQLite database that is on the specific to the client on the app, can I once if there is an exception, can I attach to the error with the App Center?
So you mean like to have a correlation ID between the?
No, I have like a SQLite database.
Okay.
On the app itself in the mobile phone.
Okay.
Okay. If there's an error or exceptions, something crashed the app.
Mm-hmm.
Can I, when I send the error log to the App Center, can I attach to the my SQLite database? Yeah, you cannot send the database file itself?
If you can write it into a file, you can attach that file.
Ah, okay. I didn't know that.
Yeah, not the whole database, but you can just dump whatever you need through the time frame, copy it into the file. I'm not sure what the size limit is, and then you can upload it.
Is there any limitation?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe.
It's not too big.
Yeah, and it might not be the best option since it's the user's data, right? So there's a lot of things that have been happening with Facebook and other companies like misusing user data. So we have to be very careful with what we're doing with it. What App Center does, like she said, it has like it handles all of the monitoring of the app. So everything from like hard crashes and exceptions, and even custom events. I don't know, you maybe want to record how many users are using the new page that you added to your app. You can send like custom events to App Center and recording like, oh, this many times where this page was accessed. And it's great as well because it works offline. So if your app crashes and it's offline, it will actually store those exceptions on a local storage on your app. And as soon as there's a connection available or the user enters the app again, I'm not sure when that happens, it will fire like everything back to App Center. So yeah, there's some great support for apps, and not only Xamarin apps, but they also support like native applications, right? I think even Cordova, other
Yeah.
Unity,
Windows.
yeah, cool. All right, so we've already covered this.
Kind of.
So yeah, there are many libraries available for us, like as Dylan mentioned, like Xamarin Essentials, thousands and thousands of plugins built by the community, also available on NuGet. There's a few like GitHub repos of basically people that will, like developers that they will like compile all of these lists of great plugins that they've used, and they'll have like lists of them, like, and what they're for and what they've been using it for. I think it's Luis, a guy from Dominican Republic. He has like one repo. Try to find it, or maybe we'll share the link later, right, Dylan?
Yeah.
So we might just compile all that. Can you like just take note of this? So yeah, there's Shiny. It's a library for backgrounding services on mobile applications that one of our friends, Alan Ricci, is building. It's gonna be, it is already pretty awesome. Like it's basically compiling all of the libraries that he has that do backgrounding into one single library. Similar to what Essential does, but only for doing background operations, like downloading files on the background and all of that complexity abstracted for you. And as Dylan mentioned, show the HTTP tracer that we've built together. And what are the next steps? What do you do when we're done here? Are you guys excited about mobile development at all? I hope we were able to show you guys a little bit. So what else? What's after this? Training, right? So there's a few platforms available that I've used, Dylan used, and are very common for a lot of you. Udemy is one of them, right? Microsoft Learn and Xamarin University that is migrating into Microsoft Learn. Practice. What is of us without practice, right? So the Xamarin team has been proposing things called the Xamarin Challenges. A few weeks ago, David Ortino, he's a product manager of the Xamarin team. He started this challenge that he asked the community to build, to replicate apps that they like or they've built into Xamarin with using the is it visual, Dylan?
Yeah, visual.
The visual paradigm, right? It's a new paradigm of UI that it's coming to Xamarin Forms on the version 4.0.
A theming engine.
Yeah, it's a theming engine, and he basically launched this challenge for people to try to build these applications and submit to his repo. The cool thing is that if you submit it till the beginning of this month, you would get a bag of swag with stickers and pins and a monkey. So I submitted mine and hopefully I'll get mine soon. There's also another, and just back on the challenges, like it seems that it's be an ongoing thing. Another guy, Paul, from the Xamarin team as well, he's starting another visual challenge, Xamarin challenge for visual components. So we will share the links as well, and if you guys want to join, you're very much welcome. There's also a resource called 10 Days of Xamarin. We'll share the links as well, but this one specifically is very cool because it starts like from the basics of building things with Xamarin up to things that are a little bit more complex. Basically, how to get started and the baby steps of what to do with Xamarin, and they'll ship like challenges for you every for 10 days. So you sign up and you get an email of a list of things to do, and you go do, and for 10 days they'll be challenging, sending you things to do. It's pretty cool. I've done it. And just another option would be the copying existing apps functionalities, things that you've seen in apps that you use on a daily basis. Try to do that in Xamarin. Try to understand how the screens work, how Xamarin Forms works, how Xamarin Classic works. And another next step would be build and launch your applications. Just after you're done like playing with it, just and you know how the project works, you know how everything, how the pages works. Build an app that you would like to show off in the store. Learn how to run a beta cycle with your users. Learn how to use tools like App Center to help you shipping versions of your app. You can also use the stores for that. The stores, the App Store and Google Play have some beta cycles as well baked into them, so it's also a good thing to know. And basically learn of tools available in the market that you can use to monitor your user experiences and monitor their exceptions and things like that. Again, a great tool is App Center, but there are other options as well, like App Insights. We've been using App Insights heavily in FCC for one app that we're building right now. There are other paid options like Raygun. I don't know if you guys ever heard of it. Like, it's a pretty expensive, but it's also like it seems to have a lot of functionality and things baked into it as well. So keep an eye on the community. Like, follow Planet Xamarin. They have Twitter and Facebook profiles. They're always sharing content. So keep an eye on the community. On Twitter as well. There's a lot of people, a lot of influential people on Twitter, like Miguel de Casa. He's always posting things. So yeah, I follow him. I follow Dylan. I follow a whole bunch of people that I find have a lot of information to share. And come to meetups. Go to conferences like the Xamarin Summit. They're a great way to meet people that are doing what you're doing and do some networking. So just now to close, I guess we would like to talk a little bit about our journeys. Me and Dylan, you want to start?
Sure. I'm actually going to bring this up here. So when we're done, I'm going to show some things.
Cool.
So I've been a developer for quite a while. I think I said 17 years. It's longer than that because I started writing code when I was like a little kid. Basically, I was a web developer. Had always lived in the web space, and I think it was about 4 years ago I got pulled into a mobile project, and it was like, hey, you got to deliver this project. I was the only developer on the project, and kind of thrust into it. And I went, okay, well, I surveyed my options, and I went, okay, well, I'm a CSharp developer. I've lived in CSharp for quite a while, and let's give Xamarin a shot. I've heard good things about it. So I started working with Xamarin, and it was interesting, very different from working in the web space. One thing that I learned very quickly is, because particularly like devices have changed quite a bit in the last 4 years, right? Like the mobile space, like if you compare a device that we have now compared to 4 years ago, like you've got the full screen, you've got quad-core chips in there, and that was like a brand new thing about 4 years ago. And the screens were a lot smaller. You didn't have the same kind of processing power or memory. You basically learned that I learned very quickly that you couldn't be sloppy with mobile at all. Like you had to be sharp, your code had to be tight, you had to look at performance very closely. You had to really understand threading. You had to understand how to build a responsive UI, how to make things appear fast, even when they might not be fast. So that all kinds of tricks in your toolbox to tackle that. And of course, you don't do that right off the bat. You don't learn that in the first month that you start working with the tool. First month, you just are trying to get by, right? Just trying to ramp up. And slowly, it gets easier, and it gets better. And the tools were improving at the time too, so that really helped. But yeah, I can honestly say that working with Xamarin has made me a much better developer than I ever was before. Much better. I'm talking like, I think the last 4 years working with Xamarin compared to the previous 4 years working with web, and working with JavaScript front ends and C# ASP.NET backends. I look at code from 4 years ago and like, there's no question how much better I've become. The mobile space, like I said, because you can't be sloppy, it forces you to become a better developer. You either have to learn the techniques to actually make your app perform properly, or you're gonna not deliver a successful app. And that's usually the first couple tries. That's why, like the slide that we had up last, the build and launch, this is super important. This is like, what I really learned is, this is only the getting started part. It's really the learning to run a test cycle, listen to your testers, listen to your users, make sure you're collecting feedback, and then launch it, because you're really not going to learn anything about how it works in a constrained environment, right? So with a constrained test cycle and things like that, you're not really going to learn. You have to try and, of course, smooth out the edges, but really it's get the app into the marketplace, get it to the real user's hands, and then make sure you have a good mechanism to collect feedback at that point, because that's where the gold is. That's where you actually learn how to build a good app, is in that final stage when the users go, this thing doesn't work on Samsung at all. Like the app just hard crashes. And you go, oh great, I gotta get a Samsung device right away. I actually have a Samsung device because of Samsung oddities, and that's the one I carry. Like really get the app out the door so you can learn how to really build the app by listening to your users. Yeah, it's pretty cut and dry. You start getting to know. You build a better toolkit. You build a better skill set. Even if you're not using apps or building mobile apps day to day, you should build them. You should learn the ins and outs of it. You'll learn tons about async await, tons and tons about async await. You'll know how thread pooling works at a low level after a while if you keep working with it. You'll know how everything gets compiled down to IL because you need to know the ins and outs. You have to actually understand how Mono is working and .NET is operating on the individual platforms. You have to know limitations of generics are limited on iOS. You have to know that and where you hit those limitations. You have to know that reflection slows your code down. So sometimes when you're building code that makes it easier for a developer experience using reflection, it might run like garbage once you get it on the device. So you have to be careful of that. You have to be mindful of it and considerate of that. And consider that, you know, if I have an app that a user is going to use 8 hours a day because they have to use it for their job, that you don't want to kill their battery in 8 hours. You got to make sure that they still have juice left. So you have to make sure you're very, very careful with how it's using the battery, using the CPU, how much memory it's taking up. Is it using too much storage? Is it using too much network traffic? Is it chatty? Does it crash when it goes offline? All these kind of things. It's much different from the web, and it's a great paradigm to explore. So I highly recommend, even if you're not doing it day to day, tackle this platform. Start into it and see where it takes you, because it's, like I said, it's been a great journey for me and made me a much better dev.
Awesome.
Cool.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Are you able to talk about the difference between Xamarin and .NET Core?
So, like really, .NET Core is a set of libraries that sit, or it's an implementation of .NET Standard. So .NET Standard is a, like basically you can think of it like an interface and an implementation. So .NET Standard is an interface, and .NET Core is an implementation of that interface. So .NET Standard is like a set of APIs that are available to everything that conforms and supports .NET Standard. So it's a little bit different. It's an Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android are implementations of .NET Standard. So it's
not like Xamarin will be merged into .NET Core.
it conforms to .NET Standard.
Yeah.
Too.
But Xamarin runs on with Mono, right? And
Yes.
on the long run, the idea is to bring to run everything under the same engine. So even though right now they have to keep both Mono and the core in parity. So whatever they're doing in one, they have to do in the other. The idea in the long run is actually to bring everything together and have one single platform.
Yeah, don't forget the whole framework, the .NET Core, .NET.
Yeah, framework. Yeah.
Yeah, even though the community, the way that Microsoft is going is framework, core, like especially if you look at the 3.0 release notes, I think when someone even from the audience starts to, where is .NET framework?
Yeah.
They were not talking about it at all.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's all, yeah.
Actually, I think that they started the Xamarin Form with a PCF project.
Yes.
They now moved to .NET Standard.
Yes.
Why they going to .NET Standard
Um,
and next choice?
So all you'd have to do is take a look at, hold on, I'll bring it up. Actually, so can we come back to that?
Yeah.
I want to come back to that because I want to bring up a page to show just some fun that you can have with PCL. And I'm saying fun very sarcastically.
No, do it.
Yes.
Do it.
But the,
Okay, I'll bring it up now.
Yeah.
Daniel's egging me on.
I want to see that.
Okay. So PCL has like this really complex compatibility matrix. Yes, I think this is the one. No, this is not the one. Probably gonna have difficulties finding it now. So basically what happens is the way .NET Core would, or sorry, PCLs, you were basically picking and choosing which platforms you're going to support, and now you don't have to do that. It's implicitly all supported. So that's basically what it boils down to. I wish I could find this link.
Are you talking about you test the standard version and you upscale for what this compatibility is working for?
Like .NET Standard, when you're developing against .NET Standard, at this point, you know it's going to work on .NET Framework 4.7. You know it's going to work on Xamarin iOS. You know it's going to work on Xamarin Android. You know it's going to work on Mono. It works everywhere. It's basically compile once, run on anywhere that supports net standard. PCL was not cut and dry like that.
Yeah. The more with PCL, the more platforms you added, the less range you had for the APIs.
The big issue I had back in the day was when it was PCLs. It's PCLs with these platforms and if I try to expand the project, like let's say I add Xamarin Android or something like that, and then I add that platform, then the library no longer works because those some features that were there and use the library are compatible with that particular platform. It's not that standard. Just from the get-go, the APIs that are in it just simply apply to all platforms that support them.
Yeah.
So it was always a few years like PCL was always like what do they call it? PCL 145 and all this stuff like that. Always like weird like different variations to it. And it's pain in the butt like trying to expand it to
I'll try and find that URL and bring it up because as soon as you see the matrix, the support matrix, you go, oh, I understand why .NET Standard was put in place.
the big thing was like if you had a web project using PCL and then you want to go to Xamarin, that was the biggest area for compatibility issues.
Yeah, exactly. Daniel, you should continue with talk about your journey, and then I'll come back up here and I'll actually bring this back.
So yeah, so as I mentioned previously, like I've been doing Xamarin for 3.5 years. Before then, I used to be a web developer. I guess all of us start there, right? Or doing desktop or from the web, right? I jumped out of the web as soon as the all of this mayhem of JS libraries started. So when Angular started to become popular, I jumped out. So I used to do a lot of jQuery, Everything I did was using jQuery, and I was dropped in a mobile project. And at first, I started trying to figure out on my own, and where do I start? What is this? What is PCL? Oh my God, never heard of it. So yeah, like I really believe that since I became like a mobile developer, like Dylan said, I've had to actually start learning a whole lot of things because they make the quality of your product much better, right? So you have to know about testing, you have to know about all of the things that Dylan mentioned. And not only that, but a few months after I started actually like going after like documentation and things to read, I've learned about the community that backs the OSS community that is really big on Xamarin. So I started doing this thing back in Brazil, my home country. It was like a Xamarin marathon where like some Xamarin MVPs, they just gather up together and started like this little course, like a crash course on Xamarin and how to build an app from zero to hero. So that was awesome for me, and it was free, and I was amazed of the quality of the content, and that experience actually drew me to where I am at right now, speaking to you guys, seeing what those people were doing to bring users and to share the knowledge that they have on a tool that they love. Seeing that actually has led me through these 3 years to working on open source projects to being involved with the user group and having contact with people that were much more knowledgeable than I was, and being able to learn with them and being able to learn how they develop their careers. It was awesome, and yeah, that's a little bit of my journey. Thank you, guys. So about the presentation, like, do you guys have any other questions?
Them, I know, the React Native or the Flutter, they all have the project to support besides the mobile, the web app. So a lot of customers do not want to create a mobile app and a web app separate. Is there any plan to support that?
That's a great question, actually. Like, it's coming. There's a technology being developed called WebAssembly. It's not quite ready just yet. Last year we had a friend of ours from Montreal coming over here presenting talking to us about a tool called Uno. It does basically, it proposes to do everything that Xamarin does, plus the web, using WebAssembly. I'm not sure what's the plan for Xamarin Forms itself. If they're gonna once WebAssembly is reliable and production ready, I'm not sure what are their plans to target the web as well. But we do have Uno that already is doing that.
Yes, but the problem with WebAssembly, like not all of the browser support.
The browser support's pretty close to ubiquitous at this point, like all browsers support it.
Yeah.
It's performance. That's
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
the
but
challenge.
because of that, why Facebook create a library like React to fill the gap.
Well,
React Native, React, JavaScript, but still technically two separate platforms.
yeah.
I mean,
And they've been around for like way before WebAssembly came on the scene.
Yeah.
WebAssembly is relatively new. It's like 18 months old since the first prototype came out. So,
No way. Browsers have supported it since 2 years.
2 years?
Yeah,
And
the
then
first
there's
official
2.5
support came
years.
out.
It hasn't been out for very long. Like I said, I'm old. I'm past this differently.
I did have a question similar to you, but like targeted towards the two of you.
Uh-huh.
Now that Blazor is coming, would you be willing to go back to it?
Yeah, like I'm never unwilling to tackle interesting problems. Like even current state web without WebAssembly, sure.
Yeah.
It's
And
just where projects take me.
yeah, the idea of WebAssembly is actually to it's a tool that it's made not to substitute, but to be in the market with JavaScript. So it's actually to compete with the JavaScript libraries that we see nowadays.
Yes, because the Mono team, I think it was like 2 months ago, released the Mono runtime for web. So you build your app using like the CSharp, and when it runs, they really load the whole Mono runtime in
Yeah.
the browser while it's running.
They
And
figured
they
out
were
a way
like,
to-
it's just 2 megabytes.
Mm-hmm.
So
I
that was
mean,
pretty
there are like a lot, like there's a lot of hype around WebAssembly. There's a tool built by a guy called Frank Kruger. He calls it UI.
Yeah.
Like it's like an abstraction. I don't know if he uses Xamarin at
Yeah,
all.
it's Xamarin.
It
it's
is,
Xamarin
right?
Forms. It allows you to write Xamarin Forms UI and deploy it to the web.
Yeah,
It's
like-
it's a proof of concept. It's not meant for production.
Yeah.
It's just to show that it could be done.
Yeah,
But yeah, there's performance issues still with particularly with Mono because things need to be ahead of time compiled and then ship the whole framework across the web.
Sorry, I was mistaken between WebAssembly and web component.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because of that. Sorry for my mistake.
No worries.
Yeah, it's new and it's still coming. And
Yeah,
It's
coming. It's not.
interesting. It's something to watch, not something to necessarily build production apps in yet.
Yeah. Yeah. Any more questions, guys?
Well, there's, when you create a native app like iOS, Android, there's a native tool like instrument and the view architect, and it's available to help you. I wonder when you create use this way to create the app, are those tools still useful?
Yeah, you can still use that to diagnose like memory usage and
You're still able to do that.
Yeah.
You just based on the IPA file or the
Yeah.
APK file, you load that file.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So you can still use a lot of those tools to measure performance. Some of the because it's a native app, right? You might not get all the information you want, but you can still get a lot of useful information. There's also a tool out there for Xamarin called that comes with certain licenses. Yeah, Xamarin Profiler and Xamarin Inspector. So those are both useful for looking at your memory profile. And Inspector is really good for if you need to dissect your UI. It almost shows you an exploded layer view of your UI, so you can see each individual layer that's drawn on the screen, so you can figure out,
How to make it better, right?
yeah,
Cleaner.
how to make it better, or what's being drawn correctly, or whatever you want to simplify it so you have less layers on the screen, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, I got a
Yeah. Get over here.
couple of things. Okay, so first things first. I found the PCL profiles page that I was talking about. So this is the PCL profiles page that tells you which PCL profile is compatible with which framework. And it's quite extensive and complicated. So it's not fun to navigate that, particularly because it's kind of like, it's almost like surprise, it's not supported on this, in this runtime. So good luck with that. Net standard is a much more obvious way of deciphering this and packaging it up. As you can see, there's equivalents drawn here. So you can actually see which net standard equates to which PCL profile. Yeah, so it's really improved. The net standard mechanism of being able to target one single platform, just target the net standard platform. It's a way easier way of doing things. Okay, now I got a couple things. One quick one. So we talked about the training survey. So Rob Gibbons, he's a Xamarin Forms, Xamarin University trainer. He's looking for feedback. I've got the tweet up here, but I've simplified it because I know everybody's trying to figure out what that URL is. It's tinyurl.com/devtrainingq. So if you want to fill out that feedback and give it to Rob, here it is. The next thing, this is the challenge that Daniel was talking about. So Paul DiPietro is doing a collection view challenge. Xamarin Forms uses a component that it's almost like it's about to be deprecated in Xamarin Forms 4. It's called the list view. List views are pretty central to apps. It's a list, right? You've got lots of lists in apps. The Xamarin Forms list view has some limitations to what it can do, and they're basically rebuilding it and rebranding it as collection view, so we can shed some of those limitations and do the swipe gestures and things like that are now available in that collection view. It performs better. I think it renders simpler. So there's a bunch of great advantages to using it, and they want to get feedback, so they want you to kind of go and try it out. So it's part of Xamarin Forms 4. It's here at Paul DiPietro's GitHub. So Paul DiPietro /collection view challenge. and you can check that one out. All right, now I'm going to ask Emily to kill the stream, please.
Bye.
Pardon?
Bye.
Bye everybody, thanks for watching.